This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome in to another edition of the Bartholomew Town Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Bartholomew. On today's episode, my conversation with longtime Providence Journal columnist M. Charles Bakst. Charlie Bakst, one of the old guard legends, so to speak, here in Rhode Island media. And I thought it would be nice right now to bring on someone who's probably a familiar voice to some of you out there and someone you haven't heard from potentially in a little while. And also for some of you younger listeners, some people my age and younger, who may have, your media consumption may not have overlapped, I should say, with the career of M. Charles Bakst. So this will be a good introduction to him for you, someone you should add to your deck of Rhode Island media and politics and cultural baseball cards, so to speak. So obviously right now we're in the midst of an unprecedented event, and I'm sure most of you are listening from home. And hey, we're going to stick together on this operation here. And if we do, hopefully following the guidance of, some really strong medical thinkers that are at least here in Rhode Island leading the charge, right? Buttressed by an infrastructure of communication, an infrastructure of leadership that seems to be firing on all cylinders, okay? So throughout this, my role will be varied. It will be, number one, not necessarily in any particular order. I'll be, from a news perspective, I'll be trying to get you the latest information that's coming out, at least here in Rhode Island, live streaming the governor's daily and sometimes multiple per day press conferences, okay? Bringing you any information that comes in, perspective, etc., across the social media platforms. But then also, number two, to entertain. We're going to try to ramp it up here on the podcast and really dig into some interesting stuff, interesting guests, interesting topics, and balance that, both needs here, both services that an operation like this can provide. So I'm still meditating on how to do that best. It's obviously evolving every day. But I felt like today would be a good day to go and hear from an old friend here in Rhode Island. Hello. What drew you into the news industry or media in general as a writer, as someone creative? What was sort of the instinct or necessity that pulled you into news media?
It goes back to when I was a young boy in Fall River, Massachusetts. My father was Walter Winchell's first cousin, and possibly because of that, my father had an intense interest in newspapers. We always had several newspapers in the house, and Walter Winchell had a radio program broadcast at 9 o'clock on Sunday nights, and everything in the house had to stop at 9 o'clock on Sunday nights so we could listen to it. And so I think that was the environment. And then I just had an interest in it, taking a typewriter and trying to put out a little neighborhood newspaper. The city auditor lived next door to me, and he said, if you come down to City Hall, I'll get you in to see the mayor. So I interviewed the mayor. It couldn't have been a very profound interview, but... so stuff like that got me interested, and I was interested in politics, and I guess they just all sort of merged.
What was your first paid gig or internship or whatever at a major news outlet or any sort of standard issue?
Well, my first gig was with the Fall River Herald News. It was the editor of it, editor and publisher was a man named Ed Delaney. His grandson, Mike Delaney, is a prominent editor at the Providence Journal now, doing visuals. My father knew him, and between my... Let me get this straight. Between the 11th and 12th grades at Phillips Academy, Andover, I devoted a good deal of time writing a series for the paper on my the previous summer in Israel. And it was like, I wouldn't say torture, but it didn't exactly come naturally. It didn't fly off the typewriter, but, so I labored on that. And and they published it with my byline. I think I got paid for it probably $15, maybe $15 times 3. I don't remember. But what I do remember is that the next summer, heading into the summer, I walked into the paper, and Mr. Delaney said I could write, freelance stories during the summer. And I think I said I wrote some even before the summer. But anyway, at the start of the summer, I walked in and I said, well, I'm going to England for a couple of weeks with a friend and his mother. And so he said I could send dispatches from England. So I would do things like I would go to Wimbledon, and I would come back to the hotel, and I would I would write by hand a sort of a color feature story on Wimbledon. And then I would take it to a secretarial service and have them type it up. And then I would put it in an envelope and mail it to the Fall River Herald News.
Yep.
And, maybe a week later or so, they published it. And they had my name, and they had a little phrase that went with it, a young Yank in Britain. I was 18.
Wow.
So I did a few of those. I did one on Wimbledon, one on the Henley Royal Regatta, and one on something else. And when I got home, I got paid $15 a piece for those.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a couple more about my trip, and then I wrote some other things during the summer, like I went to the Newport tennis tournament and wrote about the color there. I did a piece about families that had family reunions, family newsletters. So at the end of the summer, I believe I had made $108. I would write a story. For instance, Mr. Delaney said I should go to Horseneck Beach in Westport. The state had spent a lot of money fixing it up after the 1954 hurricane, and he said I should go there and talk to some lifeguards that they probably were college kids with summer jobs, and take in the scene there. And I would come back, and I would write the thing, and I would sit in his. First of all, just writing, sitting in the newsroom. There was a trip for a kid, and then I would go into his office, and he'd take a quick look at it, and he'd write a note on it like "Run this inside," and then he would write out a voucher for me. And I think on that particular story, I might have been paid. It was either $3 for the labor and $2 for expenses, or $2 for the labor and $3 for expenses. But that, so whatever it was, and I would sit there, and he would chat away about the news business and things that had happened. Senator Kennedy, that would be Jack Kennedy, had come there one time. He was telling me about it and whatever. And it's just a wonderful way to absorb things. So as I say, at the end of the summer, I think I'd made $108.
So definitely not getting into the news business for the opportunity to make millions out of the gate. Put it that way.
Well, I didn't need to make millions. I just needed to be there to get involved.
Yep.
And so then I immediately entered Brown University, and I started in the Brown Daily Herald. And then toward the end of the year, I got a job for that summer at the Providence Journal. In those days, the Journal had offices all around the state. And I was assigned that summer to 3 different places: the Warren office, the Newport office, and the East Providence office. And I was paid $75 a week before taxes. And I was living at home. No, I was paid $75 salary plus $13 a week expense money. And that was for your car.
Yep.
But I drove one of my parents' cars and I didn't have to pay for the gas. So I really lived off the $13,
Yeah. Right.
for supper, and I banked the rest of the money. So I was living large.
That's amazing that, in that day and age, today journalists, have a similar, obviously anybody who's in any sort of creative sector, there's no guarantee unless you're in the PR industry, especially out of the gate. But the fact that you were able to, advance yourself, even chipping away while being in the center of the action at the same time, that says a lot about your hustle, I guess, and your determination.
Well, that's true. On the other hand, the hustle sometimes involves things like covering the Warren Sewer Commission.
Right. Yeah.
We did a lot of routine work, and when I say routine, there was a routine. You would constantly check the police department, fire department, funeral homes. You would call a funeral home, and I could never really figure out what to say. I would say, hello, this is the Providence Journal. Do you have anything for us?
Right.
So we spend a lot of time doing stuff like that. And it was a real pleasure to be in Newport for a few weeks, but that was really sort of above me. That was like AAA baseball, sort of the top of the minor league system.
Right.
And so anyway, I applied for a job the next summer, and they wouldn't hire me. They said, we don't have any room for you. The message really was you didn't really contribute much to our success here at the paper.
Mm-hmm.
I was only 19 when, that first summer. But I kept, and they suggested I try other papers, and I couldn't catch on anywhere, and I just kept calling the Journal. And finally they said to me, we have a 3-week, somebody's going to be on vacation for 3 weeks. We need to fill that. And we'll guarantee you another 2 weeks. So you get 5 weeks of work. So I jumped at it, and I was decent at it, and I wound up working 13 weeks. So that was good.
Once those seeds were planted, how long before you started to, I guess, sort of develop the informed opinion that is inherent in your column, or was inherent in your column, and also just sort of you have this perspective of working your way up through a single paper, a single focus. Did you ever see yourself sitting in looking out the window on Fountain Street as the columnist and working your way towards that, I guess?
Only in the most vague terms that I couldn't possibly articulate. Mm-hmm. The first thing you should know is that for many, many years, I was not in the opinion business. I was just a straight line reporter, mm-hmm. reporting the facts, and no opinion at all. I had opinions in my head, but I wasn't free to express them. And as a matter of fact, later, as I sort of evolved into a columnist, it was first I did sort of analysis pieces, which were difficult. I had to sort of be tutored in that, and then later, when I wasn't really free, even when I was doing columns as a sideline, like a Sunday column, I really wasn't free to get into the opinion business until I became a full-time columnist in 1995.
Was that a proverbial weight lifted off your shoulders? Did you feel like you'd finally reached your destiny, if you will? I mean, that seems maybe a little overstated.
I thought I was free.
Right.
Like I had freedom, and I absolutely did. On the other hand, there's a lot of responsibility. The way I would describe it, when you're a columnist like I was, the editors gave you a gift, and the gift was that you had more or less guaranteed space in the paper, and prime real estate. You'd be on the cover of a section, sometimes on the front page. Your name would be on it in big, type, and your picture. And it had a certain cachet. So that was the plus side of it, the freedom side of it. The responsibility of it was, in effect, the editors were saying, don't fill us with schlock. We want, quality columns from you, and we don't have the time to assign them to you or to talk to you about it. Just do them. You know what I mean? It was almost always up to me to come up with the column idea and get it done.
What was your, I guess, in that early period, as I guess the late 90s, let's say, as you were finding your voice, what were some of the more challenging moments that you had to write during? Obviously, there's CNC2 and Plunderdome, but also, 9/11, a lot of national news, the station fire. This all not necessarily the very beginning of your run as columnist, but the front end of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
What were those?
Funny you mentioned 9/11, because that was one time when an editor did come up to me and say, we're counting on you. We need to hear your voice, he said.
Yeah.
That was one time when I was asked to do a column. I would say some of the topics that were sort of recurring, if you go through the years there, I wrote a lot about corruption. I wrote a lot about gay rights, gay marriage. I stood up for immigrants. I would, you sort of gain insight over the years when you see one political leader, particularly in the General Assembly, but also it could be a governor, or it could be a mayor, it could be a Supreme Court Chief Justice. You see a certain pattern of arrogance, sense of entitlement, embarrassment for, if not for themselves, but that's the problem. They weren't embarrassed, but they would embarrass their colleagues. So you sort of get the drift of things after a while.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
For daily news and perspective on COVID-19 here in Rhode Island, follow me on all social media platforms. I'll be live streaming the governor's news conferences on Facebook Live every day as long as I can, and providing you with the latest news and perspective across all social media platforms. The notion of, just misbehavior in Rhode Island politics, it definitely drives people away from having an interest or potentially being a participant in a voting context. Again, that's an anecdotal statement, just my perspective, but we see it going on today. I mean, we still have these types of stories. I mean, the speaker may not be going out in handcuffs right now, but it hasn't really gone away. You were at the center of this. What's your advice to Rhode Islanders to break this cycle?
Well, the first thing I would tell people is to get involved. Yeah. And that could take several steps. One is certainly to vote, but run for office. If you don't like the people who are in office, run for office yourself. If you don't want to run for office, support somebody who is. So get involved in fundraising, get involved in advising a candidate, monitor things at the assembly, city hall, and so on. One of the problems with this is that you don't have the news coverage of politics that you used to have. The people who do it are very good, but there aren't that many of them anymore. And very few people read the newspaper, and it's frustrating.
I guess that sort of bleeds into the news in general, and the shift in terms of media consumption, where people are getting their news, how they're getting it. But let's just focus on the Providence Journal. It's sad for me as someone who grew up with the evening bulletin box, and my dad would get the bulletin, both papers. It's tough to see where it's at. I was at the Providence Journal office about a year ago, and I was in there just to pitch an idea, I think, to Alan Rosenberg. And as I was leaving, I mean, most of the desks are empty. There's people who are leasing space. So you do get the sense that there is a major shift, not much different than any other newspaper. But what do you think right now about where the ProJo is? Do you think it's time for a major overhaul of newspapers in general, or is it just going to keep grinding until they don't exist anymore?
Well, I'm not terribly optimistic. You might have noticed, or maybe you didn't know to begin with, when you went in the Providence Journal building. That building has 5 floors.
Yes.
4 floors plus a mezzanine and a basement. And the paper used to occupy all of that space. And now it's part of 1 floor.
Yeah.
And the job that I had doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. There used to be a whole roster of reporters who had beats that don't exist anymore or merged with other beats. And of course, all of the state staff offices that I mentioned, Newport, Warren, Pawtucket, Westerly, they're all gone, and the Washington Bureau is gone. And the paper is a shadow of its former self. And the Fall River Herald News has dwindled to practically nothing. And you got all those papers that are very, very weak, and they're owned by an evil company that the emphasis is on the bottom line being, what can we get away with? Who can we lay off next? And merge operations with, and so on. And it's very, very depressing. I find, on the bright side, that there are some newspapers like the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I would say the Boston Globe, that, they've had to make economies, but they try to, win readers by being good and throwing resources into it. And so that's a pleasure.
I guess that's what it comes down to now, is resources and being open to new ways of storytelling. We see, I guess the thing that I'm seeing now from my perspective is getting into the business is low wages, a lot of freelance opportunities, not a lot of pathways for people to get themselves into a situation like you were, where you're embedded in the work for decades before you have a prominent voice. Now people are almost just free to either just pop up on the internet, or, the pathway in television and radio and newspapers, it seems like it gets cut off before people can reach their self-actualized journalistic self, I guess. So,
well, I think that's true, and I certainly think that nobody's going to have a career like I did.
Yeah.
I could see that when I retired, but now it's even more dire. You have to be very nimble if you're going into the news business, and you have to be, I would think it's very hard to get a job at a newspaper these days, but if you do, you have to be very, very nimble in what you're covering and how you're covering it, and tweeting all the time and that kind of thing. And various people, as you know, their sort of way of making a living or trying to make a living is doing blogs and podcasts and things. And, it's not entirely bad in that the Internet is good in terms of delivering news or news bulletins, or even accessing, a newspaper. But it's not the same. And I have had the experience numerous times. We get the New York Times delivered. And every now and then, for some reason, could be weather-related, it doesn't come. So that day, I'll sit down and I'll say, okay, I'm going to read it online. The next day, they bring the copy that had been missing the day before. I look at it, I start to read it, and I realize I hadn't read it at all.
Yeah, right.
It's just a different experience, and it makes me virtually cry when I see people say, oh, yeah, I get that paper online. I don't need print newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had the experience countless times. I'll be at a restaurant or on a train or at a swimming pool, and I'll be reading a paper, the Globe or usually the Globe or the Times, and I'm done with it. I just can't bring myself to throw it away. So I'll look around and I'll say, would you like a newspaper? Would you like the Times? Or would you like the Globe sports section? Whatever. And invariably, certainly if the person is under 50, they'll say, no thanks, I'm all set. And it's really very, very sad, and I would say pathetic. But it happens constantly.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't know what it is that I'm a performer as well. I'm a musician. That's actually what I was doing the last 10 years before I moved back here in New York. And I sense there are some people who, if they see you perform a song that you wrote, you're playing it on an instrument, and you're singing it live in front of them, that's the ultimate experience. But the vast majority of the audience now, they don't want that. They want something that fits, that's a pre-recorded song. It's perfectly, there's no human elements to it. It's the tempo is just right for their jog or whatever it is. And so I sense that as well, where the analog world, and being 35, I got to experience both sides of that, the transition, as you did as well. That's what's scary to me is the idea that we can, Orwell's memory hole, so to speak, is easier to create when you don't have that tangible, in-depth information.
I have a friend, a contemporary, who wrote he's in a writing class, like a hobby, and he wrote he had to write an essay on how he would come back in the next life, and he wrote that he would come back as a cell phone, because that's the only way anybody would pay attention to him. he said he wrote so a little bit tongue in cheek about his children. They might be having a problem with their child, and he's standing there, and he says, "Do you think they'd ask me and my wife, with all our experience at raising kids? No, they go to Google to see how to handle a problem."
Right. All right. Last couple of minutes here. Let's first of all, one of my mentors, if you will, through the television, eventually for a few months in person, was Jim Taricani. I'll never forget the sea of journalists outside of his funeral, and also never forget his celebration on the Senate floor, United States Senate floor. You also had a similar celebration on the United States Senate floor upon retirement. I wasn't able to find that video, which is really disappointing to me, but I did find the transcript, and I did find information on Senator Whitehouse's page. Can you put that into words, what that would be like to be basically written into the Mount Rushmore of Rhode Island journalism?
I got quite a kick out of it. That was the last day that I was working. It was a Friday, and somebody came up to me in the newsroom and said, "Senator Whitehouse is going to give a speech about you." And the same morning, Mayor Cicilline came to the newsroom and delivered a proclamation. I don't remember which came first, but anyway, they said Senator Whitehouse is going to give a speech about you right now on C-SPAN. So I went over and I'm watching it, and I'm thinking, "Wow, this is cool. Yeah. This is really neat." And I was very impressed. Obviously, his staff had done a lot of research on me, and it was very well done. But the idea that he would do it at all was fantastic, and they sent me a glossy print of it. It was great, and I don't know if I thought this at the time, but as it's my firm belief, and I've been proven right, that nobody was going to have a career like I did in this day and age at the paper, at the Providence Journal, certainly, and that when I left the Post, and Ed Fitzpatrick took it over, and he was working at it for a while, but right away, very soon, they dropped the sections, the section that the column appeared in. So instead of appearing on the front cover of a section, it was inside. So right away, that took some of the visibility of the column and some of the glamour of the column, and then he left, and then he wasn't replaced.
Right. That was the end of the line, so to speak, in terms of that position. And what an influential and important role in the state of Rhode Island to just get rid of. It's disturbing.
Influential. Excuse me. Influential is your word. I don't dispute it, but I don't really. I can't vouch for it. But I can vouch for the idea that it was certainly well read.
Yeah.
I retired in 2008, September 2008, and I can't tell you how often people would come up to me. It happened to me yesterday. I was at the ballpark, and people would come up and introduce themselves to me. I was at a game a couple of weeks ago, and my wife and I were sitting next to a fellow who was he was retired. He had been the wrestling coach at Cranston West High School. And I said, I knew people from Cranston. I knew Mike Trafficante, who had been the mayor, and this and that. And we had quite a lively discussion. It didn't click on him who I was. And as the game went on, there was an usher from Rhode Island that I knew and that he knew. And so we were getting pictures taken and whatever. And the usher said to him, this guy used to work for the Providence Journal. And the guy looks at me, he says, "Oh, you're not Charlie Bakst, are you?" And he was like thrilled.
Yeah.
And this was, as I say, I retired in 2008. So here we are, 2020. It happens.
Yeah. Rhode Islanders, they love we love our broadcasters, our journalists, our basketball coaches, our Red Sox players. It's part of the DNA here, I think, or at least it was for a long time, and hopefully it still will be. My last question, I guess, would just be your advice out there for any creative person. Doesn't have to necessarily be someone who's going to end up in the news media, but in a world where now we're really focused on STEM, and I guess they make it STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, but leaning towards creative, civics, politics, things that right now aren't necessarily at the center of the educational structure in the country. Finding your own voice. What's your message to anyone out there of any age who's seeking that?
Well, first, excuse me. First, I would say, believe in yourself, plug away, stay at it, and keep your eye on the ball. And by that, I mean you may have to take jobs, side jobs, being a waiter, waitress, whatever. You may have to take a couple of jobs at the same time. You may have to move to Alabama or California or somewhere to find a job. But keep your eye on your goal. And if you have the chance, as I did, to go to a place like the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, go. And just, a place like that, not only do you learn, but you make contacts, and there's a whole national network of alumni. And you never know when it's going to help you to be able to get an interview or an opportunity if you can make contact with somebody who went to the school, taught at the school, whatever.
As always, thanks for spending part of your day in Bartholomew Town. I'll be back on Friday with a brand new episode and have daily content for you across social media. Until next time, we'll talk soon.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.